Maya walked off the bus like someone stepping out of a photograph. Edges soft, colors muted, the rest of the world already in motion. Her backpack was lighter than it looked. She had removed the small things that tracked people. Old yearbooks, ribbons, the sticker that tied her to an address. New backpacks didn't have histories, she told herself. New backpacks could not be read by anyone who wanted to know where you came from. Clearview High rose around her. Brick and glass, a low hum of voices and sneakers, and the metallic echo of locker doors. She kept her eyes level, watched the map on her phone, let her shoulders fold inward. Being invisible had rules. No eye contact, no loud laughs, a perfect indifference that read as harmless. She carried that indifference like armor. He saw her before she saw him, the way the bully always did. Bryce Carter moved through the hall like someone who owned the place. He had the quarterback's brace of confidence, the smile that looked more like a gavel than a grin. Behind him, 2 or 3 faces followed, thin halos of complicity. They were practiced in the choreography of dominance, the lean in, the casual shove, the laugh that landed behind you like a punch. She had been in that choreography before, in different schools, in different jerseys. The pattern had a rhythm she recognized by sound. The knock of a paper landing on the floor and a nickname being whispered. The finger that shoved a book just enough to spill its contents. The step that closed the distance so a corridor felt smaller than it was. "New girl," someone called as Bryce angled toward her. Maya's hand tightened on her bag strap. She let the grip ease. She had learned not to tremble, because trembling gave them a map. She dropped the books she was carrying on purpose, an accident with a practiced face, and bent to pick them up, slow enough to let the scene breathe. Bryce stood over her like a joke waiting for its punchline. "You from the city?" he asked, more to his friends than to her. They laughed before she answered. "Just moved," Maya said. Her voice was level. No, she told herself, not a single tremor. She had rehearsed blandness until it felt like breathing. He reached down and nudged one of her books with his cleated shoe. The cover skittered across the floor and landed face up. A battered paperback with a dog-eared spine. Bryce kicked it so it slid under a locker, then pushed her elbow as if meeting her had been an inconvenience. "You dropped something?" he said, smiling like he was offering a hand but not. Maya stood. No dramatic fumble now. She straightened and met him with the smallest tilt of her chin, enough to show she was present but not his plaything. The flush of the hall turned toward them in a collective intake. Bodies make audiences by standing still. The shove was the thing, the mild one that felt intimate enough to be humiliating, but not so public as to demand attention.
A shove that says, "I could crush you if I wanted, and everyone knows I don't have to." Bryce's laugh filled the corridor like a sound effect. "You could use some friends," he said to the group behind him, then to Maya, "or a map." The boys snickered. A girl near the lockers whispered the usual verdict. New girls always have that look. Maya could have screamed. She didn't. The silence she kept after the shove was not weakness, it was strategy. People like Bryce fed on reactions, a blush, a sharp word, a bent head. Each was a coin in his pocket. If she gave him nothing, he would get bored. That was the rule she had tried to live by. Make yourself dull. There was strength in dullness, not flashy, not righteous, but practical. When she bent to retrieve her book, she caught the outline of a name tag on the inside of a locker. Bryce Carter, football. The name was the stamp of the building, a small bronze star on the school's social map. She slid her thumb along the spine of the paperback and felt the pulse of a decision forming. Endurance, not exposure. She would leave him nothing to report home about. They bent away from her like the sun moving around a planet. She walked on. In class, the teacher asked a question to which she had an answer, but she swallowed it. It was another rule: do not be remarkable in a way that invites attention. At lunch, the cafeteria smelled of oranges and millions of conversations. Maya sat on the edge of an empty table, tray untouched, headphones unused, deliberate solitude in public. People existing alone in a crowded room is a kind of camouflage. But invisibility is a fragile garment. Bryce had a way of making it thin. He started small. A sticky note with a nickname tucked under a textbook. A Snapchat passed around with a mocking filter. A text message with an edited photo that found its way into 36 hands in the span of 15 minutes. Each incident was calibrated to sting just enough to matter, to remind her that she was observed. She kept her face steady as cracks formed in the perimeter of her days. At night, she would write the events down in a leather notebook she kept under her bed. It was her ledger, the times she breathed through a humiliation, the names she would someday have to explain, the dates of the small cruelties. Writing them out did two things. It turned shapeless pain into facts, and it trained her to see patterns. Patterns make blueprints. He knew how to humiliate without breaking rules. He was careful. The kind of cruelty he practiced thrived in the liminal places, between privacy and publicity, between rumor and evidence. People like him recognized a truth most people didn't. You don't need to break someone. You just need to convince everyone they're broken. 3 transfers, a girl named Naomi said as they walked home one afternoon. Naomi had a kind of gentle boldness that made her laugh sound like a dare. "That many?" Maya asked. Naomi shrugged. "You tell people too much, they make a story. Don't tell them anything." Maya nodded. Don't tell them anything. It was a rule she had tried to keep, but secrets have weight, and sometimes you need to leave them somewhere. She felt the weight of one in her chest, something she kept folded up, a small life folded into another man's world. She'd learned secrecy the way people learn to tie knots, as a survival skill. When she got home that first week, the house smelled like coffee and old leather. A black Dodge Charger sat in the driveway like an answer to a question she rarely asked. It was not just a car. It was presence made tangible, the soft growl of an engine that could arrive and alter the temperature of a street. Vin Diesel did not enter a room like other people. He arrived with the quiet certainty of someone who had spent decades moving through controlled chaos. He opened the door with a hand that could be firm or soft as the situation demanded. He stood in the kitchen in a black t-shirt, sleeves rolled, coffee cup steaming in one hand like it anchored him. "How was day one?" he asked, as if that could sum up hallways and lockers and the particular weight of being new. "Uneventful," Maya said. The word was a shield. Vin's smile was small, knowing, not surprised. "You don't have to be small around me," he said. The sentence landed like a fact, not an order, not a promise, simply a piece of the geography of their relationship. They had never been flashy about the way they fit in each other's lives. No parades, no announcements. He was a private harbor. She had chosen that. She trusted it. "I know," she said. "I know." Home was a place where strategies could be discussed in detail. He never asked for retribution. He never offered to storm the school with a tidal force. He asked what she wanted, what she needed, and when she said she wanted autonomy, a way to press back without handing him the steering wheel, his face eased. "You're not asking me to fight for you," he said, tasting the words. "You're asking me to make room for you to fight." She nodded. He looked at her like someone cataloging options and settled on one. "If you need me to be a presence, I can be that. I can make sure." He stopped, choosing the middle ground he had always preferred. He would make sure doors were open,
that some people thought twice before making the corridor smaller. But he would not be the weapon. Maya appreciated the boundary. She wanted a father who would anchor her, not a bodyguard who would solve the problem for her. Agency meant different things when you were the one who had to live inside your choices. The weeks bled into ritual. Bryce found small ways to puncture days. A rumor, a late-night message full of cruel suggestions about what she did or didn't deserve. He worked in whispers and screenshot-ready insults, phrases that seemed designed to read well in a feed.
His power was amplified by his friends. They were the ones who made the jokes a chorus and the locks on his locker a sign of status. Once, a hand moved across the back of her jacket in the corridor and left a smear of ketchup from someone else's lunch. People noticed and the laughter started. Bryce had a way of making accidents into signatures. She walked faster, held her head higher, let her eyes focus on a point just past him. Let them laugh, she thought. Let them have the moment. They always wanted a crescendo. Give it to them cheaply. Maya had rules for the way she navigated cruelty. They had worked until they didn't. Patterns are weapons until someone reads the manual. The day everything changed began like any other. A gray morning, a bus that smelled like old rain, the lockers humming. Maya had been inside the school 20 minutes when a paper slipped from her hand and scattered along the linoleum. She crouched, gathered sheets, and felt a presence over her shoulder. Bryce was there, closer than usual, the crowd behind him a flare of interest. "You think you're tough?" he murmured, loud enough for the cluster to hear. "You think you can just stroll in and not be owned?" Maya did not answer. She folded the papers into her binder and rose. "What's your last name again?" he prompted, smiling. He liked the way an unfamiliar surname could be the key to rumor. Names invite histories people love to file away. "Maya Williams," she said, as if that were enough. He repeated it, slow and theatrical. "Williams," he said, like wealth, like someone's famous, like you got someone to buy you your way in. "Not my way," she corrected, "mine." The crowd liked the correction. A few people nodded. That small gesture, someone looking like someone defended, made Bryce's lips curl. He leaned forward and shoved a palm into her shoulder just enough to make her step. The motion was practiced. He had perfected the moment's optics. People around them sucked in breath. She could have fallen. That would have been a show. Instead, she steadied herself, adjusted her bag strap, and looked him in the eye. If a sound describes the taste of power, it is the quiet click of a camera thumb. Someone took a photo. Someone else started a video. The hall was full of handheld lights. He pushed harder. This time there was a shove that made her stumble. People laughed, and the laughter made a wall. She could have clapped back. She did not. She knew the calculus of anger. Her silence was a gamble. "Why don't you cry for us?" Bryce said, voice oily. "Make it easy." Maya felt something thin and electrical that could have been rage or fear or a combination. She kept her face like a calm surface over rushing water. She let herself feel it and did nothing about it. Her hands tightened until the knuckles blanched. You could tell people were waiting for the break. In the crowd, there was a girl who had been in 2 of Maya's classes, a quiet kind of observer. Her name was Leela. She hovered by the locker and watched. Leela had a phone out and was scrolling, eyes moving because something in the room had just shifted from casual cruelty to a cruelty that wanted an archive. Maya reached into her bag and took a deep breath. In the space between one breath and the next, she decided she would not give him the picture he had come for. She straightened. Then Bryce did what bullies do when the usual tools do not work. He tried to cut deeper. "You're nothing but a secret," he said. "Bet your famous daddy's hiding something. Bet he doesn't even know you're here." The audience hummed at the idea. Secrecy is an invitation for conjecture.
People like stories. They invent them when facts are too few. Maya's jaw tightened. His words were a deliberate blade. He aimed at a place that would sting because it suggested dependence, a borrowed existence. She could have corrected him. She could have said nothing. She kept silent. Bryce's friends jeered. Phones pointed. The click of shutters, the whispering chorus. The shove came again, a touch that was almost a caress, it was so casual. This time someone else intervened. A teacher rounded the corner and stepped between them with the kind of authority that was administratively required. The conversation broke up. Bryce and his retinue moved on like a tide evening out. It should have been over, but small acts reject closure. The boy who had recorded it kept his phone in his hand and smiled like he had saved something for later. After school, on the curb where parents hovered and traffic breathed, Maya pressed the call button. She didn't want to be alone with the echo of Bryce's last words. She did not want to be the subject of a video that might be edited into something sharper than it was. A black Charger rolled into view like a vignette from a movie she had never consented to starring in. Polished metal, a low engine growl that sounded like a contained storm. It pulled up at the curb with a precision that spoke of practice. He cut the engine and stepped out with the slow, unhurried gait of someone whose arrival was always timed to matter. He carried no entourage, no bright announcement. He walked like someone who expected to be seen. Bryce, who had stayed by the parking lot to hold court, saw the car. His smile faltered. A small, involuntary movement changed the angle of his posture. People like Bryce perform best when the stage is theirs. An outside presence with influence, not necessarily violent, just undeniable, turned a courthouse into a courtroom that favored different judges. Then moved toward Maya, and the space between them seemed to change temperature. He hugged her quickly, one brief public gesture that said, "I'm here." Everything else was detail. He did not sweep in with orders. He listened. "What happened?" he asked, low, in the language they had always used, practical, not theatrical. "Same as usual," she said. She did not want him to take over. She did not want his shadow to be the reason people would now think twice about how they treated her. She wanted agency. He nodded, respect in the tilt of his head. "You want me to talk to the principal?" he asked. Maya shook her head. "No, I want a plan." He smiled without showing teeth. "Thought you might say that." Bryce watched from a distance, the group's laughter dissolving into a low murmur as the Charger idled in the background. He was measuring the new variable in his equation, the drive, the presence. He registered it as a threat because it was not the kind of threat he could manage with a shove. He had built his kingdom on a set of predictable rules. The arrival of someone who could rewrite the outcome without raising his voice unsettled him. For the first time in a long while, Bryce felt small. Maya and Vin sat in the car for a long moment. The engine was off, but the scent of leather and faint cologne held the world at bay. He asked questions that were careful, not leading. He listened to the ledger she kept under her bed. Dates, times, messages, the names of witnesses. She had kept everything because she had known one day she might need to make an argument that counted. "You sure you want this?" he asked finally. "I'm sure," she said. He admired her the way people admire architects for the things they build out of intention. "You don't have to do this alone," he said. "You won't do it for me," she said. The phrase was a boundary. She wasn't pushing him away. She was asking him to stay in a role that supported but didn't dominate. He looked at her with approval. They made a plan in the way people make plans when legal and ethical lines matter. It involved witnesses, non-invasive recording of public interactions, gathering what had already been made public by those who had been sent the messages Bryce had posted, and a network of students they could trust to share the truth if it was presented plainly. No hacking, no illegal following, no midnight break-ins. Just accountability assembled by people who had seen the same pattern and were willing to say so. People who hide behind screens eventually leave fingerprints, Maya said, the line a whisper into a hum of idle engine and passing cars. She liked the way it sounded because it was true. Cruelty performed privately wears traces when it's carried out repeatedly. Vin nodded. You set the tempo. She did not ask for threats to be made against Bryce. She asked for a way to make the pattern visible in daylight, to show the school what he had tolerated as entertainment. I want them to see what he does when no one is watching, she said. I want the truth to be the thing that makes him small, not me. He understood the subtlety. He had never been one to make dramatic salvations. He liked the way this was to be done, quietly, surgically, by people who had integrity. His presence made some students think twice, and that was enough for now. Back at school, Bryce's posture showed small cracks. He started snapping at his friends in ways that were not all swagger and more like worry, the way a king might inspect his crown more often. The texts he sent in the late night had a different tone, sharp, defensive, the kind of written words that try to rebalance a world but end up revealing the hand that trembles. He scrolled obsessively. He read old messages and reread them until meaning curdled into suspicion. The followers he had once counted on were sometimes slow to reply. Popularity, like applause, is a fragile economy. Maya continued to move through school like she had practiced. Steady, measured, visible, not as spectacle, but as a fact. She traded notes with Leela and Naomi, friends who were not loud supporters, but who saw truth and chose to be witness. They made a lift of people who had been in Bryce's orbit when things happened. Girls who had been the butt of jokes, boys who had stood by in the hall. They collected dates and times, the names of group chats, messages that looked innocuous until you read them in the context of a pattern. Sometimes proof is not a hammer, but a mirror. When enough small reflections line up, the image becomes undeniable. In late afternoon, Maya stood outside the library and watched Bryce lean against his locker, face lit by the glow of his phone. Leela came up beside her and, without a flourish, handed her a small envelope. Inside were printed screenshots, real messages, not edited, with timestamps and the names of people who would confirm their veracity. Another friend had printed them at home and stapled them together. It was carefully mundane, stapled paper, the kind a school office would file away, not something dramatic you find in a sewer. "You sure about this?" Leela asked, lower, urgent. Maya looked at the papers. The weight of them was the weight of a decision. This was not publicity. This was evidence. It could change things in ways that were messy and adult and necessary. "Yes," she said. As she walked toward Bryce's locker, the sun was low, casting long lines across the hallway. People moved between classes, voices layered like soundscapes. The stapled packet fit in her hand like a promise. She thought of the ledger under her bed and of the leather notebook where she had written not only the name of the bully, but also the outline of a person she wanted to be, someone who chose her battles based on truth, not rage. Bryce wasn't alone. His friends clustered, half attentive, the way people stand at the foreign border of an argument. He glanced up at Maya and scowled, the expression of a man for whom reputation was a currency. He had expected that people's ability to humiliate him was as absolute as his ability to humiliate others. He had not accounted for the patience of someone who had been taught to endure long enough to know where to strike. Maya tapped the stapled packet against her palm like a metronome. The motion was calm, deliberate. She slid the papers into the locker next to his, a small surgical act that delivered facts into public space without spectacle. People would find them. Phones would take photos. Those were the mechanisms of this era. Quiet evidence amplified loudly. She walked away before anyone tried to stop the diffusion. There was no dramatic announcement. Power unravels in the absence of grand gestures. It unravels when enough people hold a mirror steady. The first ripple was subtle. A girl found the packet while reaching for a book. She read quickly and raised her voice a little. Phones lifted like sunflowers turning toward light. The images spread faster than a rumor could pivot. Bryce looked up, and the expression that crossed his face was not anger, but a different, thinner thing. Surprise, the kind that comes when the ground you thought solid shifts. He tried to reclaim control with words at first. Denial, a practiced laugh, an accusation, but the tide had already turned. People had seen the messages. The chain reaction was instantaneous and dull. Friends who had hung on for years hesitated. Loyalties formed by doing nothing are often the first to dissolve when doing nothing becomes active complicity. He stormed through the hall like someone searching for a face he could bully into complicity again. He needed an ally, something to anchor him, but the anchors were slipping. The boys who usually mimicked his anger stood mute. The chorus was less sure now. Maya's rule had been patience, and patience had teeth. She did not dance, she did not gloat. She watched as the network they had put together took on the work of telling the truth. It was not her voice alone, it was many small voices aligning. That evening, after school, she and Vin sat on the hood of the Charger, its engine cool, and the air carrying the scent of late roses from a neighbor's yard. The house glowed behind them. He looked at her with that same steady gaze he used when he had to trust someone to do something daring with careful hands. "How's your plan feeling?" he asked. "Like it's starting to do what I asked it to," she said. There was no triumph in her tone, only a measured satisfaction. She watched the sky go from indigo to near black. The world had the hush of something waking up. He cracked a smirk. "You make quiet look loud." She smiled back, grateful for the line. There were things he couldn't fix for her, and things he couldn't be for her. He could, however, be the place she could return to after the day had demanded more than she wanted to give. Inside the house, phone notifications chimed like small bells. She did not check them. There would be time for that later. Later, a video started to circulate. A clip from the corridor, Bryce's shove immortalized in seconds. People were arguing about it in comments, some defending him, some posting screenshots from the packet. The story was starting to shape itself.
Bryce's reaction was a quick, downward spiral that was nearly invisible in real time. He texted friends angrily, posted denials, deleted and reposted, tried to control a narrative that was slipping away. He walked the halls like a man whose currency had been devalued overnight. Maya sat in the quiet of her room and wrote. She wrote the ledger's next entry, not as a tally of grudges, but as a record of actions. Evidence collected, witnesses confirmed, patterns recorded. She was careful to note names, dates, the places where people had been present. Her handwriting was steady. She closed the notebook and slid it under the bed. At the edge of sleep that night, she thought of the Charger, of Vin's low voice. She thought about the balance of power and how it was always a precarious thing when it's built on fear. She thought of the way people conflate loudness with truth and how sometimes the quiet ones can move an entire room simply by picking up a stapled packet and leaving it where everyone could see it. The next morning, the school felt different. There was a subtle tension in the air, like the moment before rain. Students clustered in small groups and spoke in low tones. When Maya walked into the foyer, someone lifted a phone, and the small flash of a camera sent light across her face. She kept walking. She felt no victory in the instant. There was only the work, next steps, witness statements, the slow, legal kind of thing adults mention in school offices. The exposure would not instantly erase the damage Bryce had done, but it would reframe the conversation. That, she had decided, was enough for now. In the locker room of the school's social currents, allegiances began to shift. Bryce's friends, who had once been buoyed by his confidence, now stole glances to see whether the floor would drop. A friend who had laughed the loudest when a video played found his own name in a message that made him squint and look away.
Friendship, built on the willingness to join a joke, is the first to fracture when a joke reveals cruelty. Bryce was not beaten. He was unsettled and dangerous in a way that made people step back. He strode through the halls with a jaw set like a trap being sprung. He paced, he pushed through crowds. He tried to spin the narrative. He called friends. He posted a denial that read like a script. Maya watched from a distance and felt the stirrings of something she had not expected. Not vindictiveness, but a strange, cool empathy. Power wielded by cruelty corrodes the self as much as it damages others. She had seen it before in the ledger of other people she had met on her moves. People who punch air at strangers eventually swing at the people standing closest to them. She didn't want him destroyed. She wanted him accountable. There was a difference. Responsibility, not ruination.
On a Friday afternoon, as the halls emptied and sunlight poured through the windows in a way that made the dust visible like a galaxy, Bryce caught up with her. His face was pale with the adrenaline of a man who had been cornered and decided to lash out rather than reason. He stepped in front of her so she had to stop. "You think you can do this?" he asked. His voice was lower than usual. It lacked the casual cruelty and was instead threaded with a real edge. Maya looked at him without flinching. Around them, the world kept moving. A teacher closing a classroom door, the clatter of a basketball in the gym, a couple of kids carrying pizza. "I didn't do anything," she said. "You put those papers on my locker," he said. "You put them out for everyone to see." "I left them where the school could find them," she said. "They were public." "You're a coward," he said. "Maybe," she said. Her voice was calm, the kind of calm that does not invite the other person to continue. It is the kind of pause that holds a mirror. "You think like your dad," he sneered. The jab was meant to wound, an attempt to hand her dependence back to her. It was a move he had used before, the weaponizing of family. She let the words settle. Her father's name had been kept quiet because it was not hers to wave like a banner. It was personal, a piece of her private life she had kept folded and safe. But his name did not belong to Bryce. "Maybe I do," she said quietly. The sentence was not confession. It was a factual ignition. She thought like someone who had seen violence and chosen to build a response, who had learned patience, who had learned the power of assembling truth. He swung. The motion happened fast enough that anyone unprepared might think it had been sudden. He wanted spectacle. He wanted a fight that would reassert his standing. It was almost cinematic in its intent. A blow to prompt a chorus, to make her flinch, to make him king again. Maya did not flinch. She had expected it. She had trained for it, not in fist practice, but in the way you steady your feet for a storm. She sidestepped. His hand went past air and struck the locker instead, a metallic clang that echoed down the corridor like a wrong note. People turned. The small crack in the quiet widened. Bryce's face shifted as if surprised he had been caught by his own theatrics. For an instant, he looked like a child who had tried to break something to get a parent's attention. The moment did not give him the rally he wanted. Instead, it exposed him. That exposure was subtle, but it landed. He staged a final, furious accusation. "You're going to regret this." Maya met his eyes. "Regret what?" she asked. "Being honest?" The line hung between them, and the school rummaged through it, deciding what to keep. Some students smiled faintly at her words. Others shifted, unsure which side they occupied now. He stormed off, the sound of his retreat like a closing vein. People watched him go, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and relief. It was not a victory, not yet, but the stage had shifted. Bryce's performance had been interrupted by something he did not control. Maya walked away. Her steps were deliberate. She felt the weight of the stapled packet in her mind like a small gravity. Evidence had a power that rumors never did. It did not humiliate like a cruel joke. It simply reframed what people thought when they calculated reputations. That evening,
In the quiet light of the kitchen, Vin looked at her and smiled. "You were calm in there," he said. "Had to be," Maya answered. "He wanted me to react." "So what now?" he asked. He knew better than to assume the plan had ended with the packet. "We wait," she said, "and we gather. We make sure nobody can pretend they didn't see it." He nodded. There was a hospital kind of patience to him, the sort of patience that cared for wounds without yanking them open. He was steady. Their phones buzzed. A new message thread had formed among several students who had seen the packet. People were sharing access, names of witnesses, friends willing to sign statements, older students offering to speak to a guidance counselor in support. The network was small but precise. Accountability, she realized, was a social thing before it was anything else. The next morning when she walked onto campus, something had changed. The air had the crispness of a market about to open. Conversations had a different tenor. There were whispers that weren't cruelty, but consideration. The world felt like a film about to move into the second act. Everyone waiting to see how the character with the choice would choose. She wasn't naive. She knew consequences could be messy. She knew Bryce might lash out in ways that weren't visible right away. She had no desire to humiliate him for the sake of a crowd. She wanted the school to be better because people had to answer for what they did. In the cafeteria, a group of girls she barely knew approached her and asked if she would sit with them. Naomi slid into the seat across from her and gave her a small conspiratorial grin. Lila joined too, and they formed a quiet triangle of people who had made witness. "You did it," Naomi said. Not triumphantly, just as an observation. Maya shrugged. "We did it," she corrected. They ate in companionable silence. It was a small victory, not a coronation. There would be meetings and statements and maybe a slow unraveling of Bryce's influence. Or there would be resistance. Either way, Maya had discovered that the thing she'd feared most, the spotlight, could be a tool if you used it with intention. Back in the corridor later, Bryce met her gaze. There was something in his look that suggested a new calculation. He had lost the ease of his cruelty. People had seen evidence. The ledger was no longer just a book under her bed. It had become a public paper trail. He didn't speak. He did not need to. The silence said enough. He had misjudged how fragile his power was. He walked past her with a step that had the hollow sound of someone who had mislaid confidence. Maya kept walking. She felt tired, but not defeated. There were more tests ahead, more conversations to be had in offices with principals whose patience was shallow and whose policies often preferred a tidy silence over messy truths. But for now, the corridor hummed with a different energy, a sense that facts had weight and that weight could move people. That night, as she packed her bag, a notification flickered across her phone screen, a headline in the student-run news feed, an objective line about alleged allegations and evidence, student-led account sparks review. The piece quoted witnesses and quoted school officials who promised impartial investigations. It was a formal sort of thing, not a climax. It read like the beginning of adult consequences. She put the phone down and slid the leather notebook under the mattress. She felt a pull toward rest, a hunger for a sleep that might not be clean but would be honest. Outside, a car's engine rumbled, the signature low growl they had come to notice, and then the sound faded. She closed her eyes and let exhaustion take her. There was more to come. The ledger was long, and patience had been a beginning, not an end. In the quiet twilight of her room, she understood that victory was not a scene, but a season. It would come in the mundane ways people changed, in apologies made and boundaries honored, in the slow editing of the social landscape. She also understood something else. Being someone's child, secret or public, didn't grant her a shield. It simply changed the variables of the equation. People who thought fame meant invincibility sometimes forgot how ordinary consequences could still apply. She was not interested in using her father's name as a battering ram. She was interested in the quiet architecture of accountability. If someone had asked her at the start whether she'd prefer a dramatic showdown or a slow surgical correction, she would have chosen the latter. She liked the idea of dignity restored. She liked the idea of dignity restored. It felt like a slow repair, stitches you couldn't see, but that held the seam together. The next days were a map of small, ordinary steps toward that repair. Statements taken in small offices. The guidance counselor reading her ledger and nodding, in the way adults do when they finally have to pay attention. A coach who agreed to sit down and listen. Parents who filed emails and asked for meetings. The school called a hearing. It was the kind of thing designed to look official. An auditorium with folding chairs, a principal who spoke in careful, neutral sentences, and a panel that seemed to exist somewhere between earnestness and legal caution. Maya went with 2 witnesses, Leela and Naomi. Vin did not barge in.
He stood in the back, a quiet silhouette by the exit, his hands folded, the Charger parked a respectful distance away. He was there as backbone, not as a battering ram. Bryce arrived with his parents, 2 faces that had practiced the expression of bafflement. He walked in like someone who still expected the room to bend to accommodate him. For a moment, before the proceedings began, he scanned the crowd and landed on Maya. She met his look with the same steady eyes she used in hallways, but with a new layer now. The ledger's patient geometry encoded into her face. She was not a stranger anymore. She was evidence with a name. The hearing unfolded in a set of bureaucratic cadences. People read statements. There were pauses where legal phrases hung in the air. The printed packets were passed along like small artifacts. When Bryce's father asked if there had been an opportunity for dialogue, someone gently suggested that the pattern of messages and behavior did not look like a single misstep, but a series. It was the kind of phrasing that sounded like judgment without malice, a way of naming harm and calling it by its right shape. Bryce spat a few words, denials, a practiced flurry of bravado. But when Leela stood and read the messages with the clarity of someone who had watched cruelty happen more than once, his voice thinned. The truth was not theatrical. It was a record. It is harder to stand on a stage when people keep handing you receipts. What the panel decided was procedural but heavy with consequence. Bryce would be suspended for a period long enough for the message to land, not merely a punishment but a pause for consequence and reflection. He would lose his captaincy for the season, and the school would require guided restorative meetings where he and those he'd hurt could speak with mediation. There would be mandatory education sessions for the student body, lessons not framed as punishment but as repair. The last thing the principal said before the room emptied was the kind of line adults think sounds fair. Accountability isn't about ruining someone, it's about asking them to be better. Outside, the Charger waited like a patient animal. Vin's posture loosened when Maya emerged. He didn't slap her back or shout praise. He clapped once, low, like someone who felt his heart uncrumple a little. She leaned into him for a second and then stepped back. Victory, she had decided, did not require clinging. News spread in the way it does among teenagers, through phones, through whispered retellings, through the student news feed that printed an even-handed account of the panel's findings. Some people said it made them proud, others said it had been inevitable. Bryce's friends, those who hadn't spoken up when the messages first circulated, now found themselves in a quieter kind of account. A few apologized, a few retreated. People who had liked his posts began to unlike them, as if the social currency had suddenly lost its value. For Bryce, the world pulverized into small humiliations that felt inescapable because they were social currency rather than physical blows. His father argued with school administrators. He tried to post a video explaining himself. It was a disjointed thing that read like someone searching for a script. He reached out to friends.
Some replied with quick, guarded messages. Others did not reply at all. In the halls, students who once laughed at his jokes looked past him. That absence was its own kind of consequence. Power built on laughter curdles fast when the laughter dries up. Bryce's face grew taut with confusion and a brittle kind of rage that rolled off him like heat. He didn't get violent again. That was never the point. What he got instead was a shrinking of the stage. Invitations stopped. The captain's jersey was ceremonially passed to someone else, an awkward moment filmed by a dozen phones and shared with commentary that ranged from vindicated to sad. People debated what he deserved in 1,000 different comment threads, and that debate itself kept him small in a way a punch would not have. He tried one more public gambit. In the cafeteria, he stood up on a table, lifted his voice, and delivered a clumsy apology that sounded more like a demand to be forgiven than a real reckoning. Some students watched with arms folded. Others filmed. The footage made it to the feed where people dissected it. The apology had no listening in it. It had no ownership. It was swallowed by the same network that had amplified his power once. Maya watched from a table across the room. She didn't clap. She didn't rise. She looked for the presence of a genuine shift, an acceptance of wrong, an attempt to repair things beyond performative lines. When none came, she let the moment pass without savoring it. Accountability, she had learned, is a long season, not a single scene. There were quieter ripples, too. Teachers who had once shrugged at hallway jokes began to intervene more quickly. The guidance counselor pushed for workshops on digital responsibility. Older students arranged peer sessions. The student newsfeed published an editorial about compassion and courage that quoted anonymous voices who had seen things happen and finally stood up. The school did not become a paradise overnight, but the architecture of tolerance altered slightly. Hallways felt safer because people knew the cost of cruelty had been publicly accounted for. Bryce's parents moved him to counseling. He kept to himself for a while. Then he showed up at the mediation with a face that looked like someone learning a foreign grammar. The restorative sessions were awkward and angry and sometimes productive in the way that real work can be, halting, messy, and necessary. Victims sometimes left them feeling heard, other times not. The process had no guarantee of repair, only the possibility of it. Maya sat through a handful of meetings, spoke when she needed to, and kept the ledger at the edge of her mind as if it were a map with certain roads closed. Life in the neighborhood resumed its textures. Vin didn't parade triumph. He remained a steady presence, a hand on the doorframe, an engine that would start and stop without fanfare. The charger became a motif in her small universe. The way it hummed when it pulled into drive, the way it held her after long days. They talked less about the drama than about the day-to-day things. School projects, her schedule, what she was reading. Those conversations anchored the part of her life that didn't,